Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Let's just continue. This is a short halacha, which has to do with darchei shalom. And darchei shalom, like we learned before, indicates that even when there are times when a person has not been kona something legally, has not acquired something legally, uh, because let's say he's on private property, or he's in a very urban area which is densely packed with people. So his being just by virtue of something being in his four amos does not make allow him to be kona. So nonetheless, the rabbis sometimes awarded someone an object if he put in exertion or effort um, um, to acquire it. And so if it's a mitzia, um, then your four amos acquire something for you automatically as long as you're in an open space that is not private property. Um, but if you're in a condensed area, we don't say that. Okay, but the previous halacha had said that if a person puts in considerable effort to acquire something that's hefker, um, then sometimes the Chachamim said because of darchei shalom, we are not going to allow anyone else to take it. Um, let's say a person has a beehive on his property or has doves that stop on his property. Okay, let us go on to halacha ches. Ketana yeshla dalad amos le'inyan mitzia, hol v'yeshla le'inyan get. So here there's a distinction made in the halacha between a female minor and a male minor. Okay, so a girl under bat mitzvah. So the rabbis say that anything that is within her 4 cubits, that is from hefker, she immediately acquires as a mitzia, like as finding a lost object or finding a hefker object. And the reason why the rabbis gave her that is because since she is capable of being divorced in that way by throwing a get in her vicinity, so the same thing will apply for her ability to acquire something from hefker. It's an unusual halacha, um, but it basically states that since this mechanism is available to her in cases where a man marries a minor female and wishes to divorce her, he can deposit a get within her vicinity and have her divorced. So therefore she has those same 4 amos with which to acquire other things as well, and therefore she would be no different from an adult, and therefore could acquire something that's within her 4 amos. Aval katan ein lo daled amos, but a minor male, okay, like a boy under bar mitzvah, he does not have those daled amos, and because that was never, he doesn't have the sufficient knowledge, and it was never awarded to him by the Chachamim. Umutar litol. I just switched to the next PDF. Umutar litol mitzia midaled amosav, and it is therefore permitted to take something that is within his vicinity that is something that's hefker. Va'af im higia liyado ein ba mishum gezel shel Torah, and that's true even if the boy picked it up already. There's technically no prohibition of gezel, ella aser midivrei sofer mipnei darkei shalom, but it's still prohibited in the eyes of the sages. In other words, the sages. The point is that a minor child, a child, cannot technically be kona, cannot acquire something from hefker on their own. And therefore, even if I take candy from a baby, so to speak, quite literally, if I take candy from a baby, I haven't committed gezel. I haven't committed actual theft. If the baby finds something on its own, if the child finds something on its own. Aval imnasnu matana lekatan yesh ba mishum gezel shel Torah shehakatan kona kishadas acheres makne oso. But that's only if a child picks up something from Hefker. But if a child is given something by an adult, so then since the adult put it in the hands of the minor, the adult's cognizance and the adult's cognition has transferred ownership over to the minor, and the minor therefore becomes the legal owner. And if I therefore take candy from a baby that was given to it from an adult, I am guilty of actual gezel. So this is a little bit. I think it's a little bit overly technical for our discussion. I don't know necessarily that we have to go into the Imrei Yaakov. The point, however, of this halacha is that whenever a child is given something by an adult third party, then the child becomes the legal owner. When does this have relevance to us? This has relevance on the first day of Sukkot. The halacha is brought down that you should not give your esrog to a minor, because the child has the ability to be kona something from an adult, because the adult's participation in giving it over to the minor makes the child the legal owner of the esrog. But the child does not have sufficient cognition to be able to give it back to his father. So we know that on the first day of Sukkot, for example, there's a mitzvah of ulakachtem lachem, that the four species have to belong to the person who's taking them in order for him to fulfill the mitzvah, because the Torah says, take for yourself. On all other days of Sukkot, if you want to shake your friend's Daled Minim, his lulav and esrog, it doesn't have to be yours. But on the first day of Sukkot, there's a specific mitzvah for the lulav and esrog to be mine when I shake it. So that's why what we do is we let a child have it, and we say, here, like if I lend my lulav and esrog to someone, I have to actually make it his temporarily. Here it's yours temporarily, and when you're done with it, you'll give it back to me, and you'll transfer ownership back to me. So the halacha says that if you haven't yet fulfilled your mitzvah of lulav and esrog, do not give it to a minor child to fulfill the mitzvah first, because he lacks the proper cognition to give it back to you and make it yours once again. Your cognition as the giver can make it legally his, but he cannot transfer it back over to you. And so that's where this halacha comes into play in real life situations. But I guess a real life situation would also. You're walking down a side street, and all of a sudden a child comes along a $20 bill. So normally we would say that if it's in the vicinity of a person, within his Dalet Amos, he immediately becomes the owner. The exception to that halacha is specifically a male child. A female child is different, because the rabbis gave her Dalet Amos also because of her, she needs the ability to acquire a get in that fashion. But a male child who doesn't have to acquire a get in that fashion does not have the Dalet Amos. And therefore, technically, even if the child is hovering over the $20 bill, you could pick it up and say, oh, okay, it's mine now. But once the child picks it up, you're not allowed to take it away from the child. Any questions, comments? Okay, if not, we'll go on to the next.
Yeah, Rabbi, just a quick question about if you did make the mistake and gave the lulav and etrog to the child, and the child sort of gave it back to you lovingly, but it wasn't really, I guess, legally. So now, if you're using that lulav and etrog, is under what classification does it come? Is it gezel, or what is it now? That because you're using it.
Well, you're essentially borrowing it from the child. It still belongs to the child, but he's given you permission to use it. The problem is, though, that if it's the first day of Sukkot, it's a problem, because the Torah says that the lulav and esrog has to belong to you in order for the mitzvah to be fulfilled. So if that's why you should, on the first day, you should shake the lulav and esrog yourself, and then give it over to a child. And so even if the child lacks cognition to make it yours again, it's okay, because all subsequent days of Sukkot, you're allowed to be shaking someone else's lulav and esrog. So there's no harm, no foul. Okay?
That's what I'm saying. So if you let's say go to shul in the morning, you come home and then you give it to the child at lunch to do it, then there's this seems like then there's no issue.
Yeah, as long as you've already shaken it and then you give it to your child afterwards, it's no problem. It's only if you give it to him before you've shaken it that it becomes a problem. You've lost the mitzvah.
Thanks.
Okay, sure. Okay, the next halacha is another halacha having to do with darchei shalom, and it basically says, and this is this may shock you when you read this, but do you know that you have financial rights over your children because they are your dependents? I mean, not your adult children. Many of you already have adult children. But let's say you have minor children living in your house, or even adult children living in your house who are your financial dependents. What obligations do they have to you? This is a perennial question. At what point do you start charging your adult child rent? Because you want them to have that sense of responsibility and maybe even start thinking about moving out of the house. You can't keep that. They can't live in your basement forever. But in this halacha, what we're going to discover is that the rabbis feel that children who are dependents have certain obligations or debts to their parents because the parents are giving them so much. And we normally don't think in those terms, but let's see what the halacha says. Mitzias beno uvito hasmuchim al shulchana. Afal pi shehem gedolim harei shalo. So the halacha is that if a child finds something on the street, a young boy or a girl or a young man or a young lady who's still living in her parents' home, walks down the street one day and they find a $20 bill. Amazing. Fantastic. Right? They come home and the girl comes home. She says, "Daddy, you won't believe it. I found a $20 bill today." The father tells his daughter, "Daughter, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you must surrender that $20 bill to me. That's mine." Because the rabbis made a takana that anything that children find, even adult children, as long as they're still dependents living off of their parents' support, have to surrender anything they find over to their parents. And Chachamim tiknu lo mipnei darchei shalom hoil v'zanan mishalo. And the rabbis made this institution as payback to a parent who supports their child. And this is true even if the child is legally an adult. So let's take a look first at the Imrei Yaakov before we go any further. He says over here, "Bino ubito hasmuchim al shulchano." And by the way, if you tried this, what do you think the reaction would be of your 21-year-old son or daughter? And they say, "You won't believe it today. I found a $20 bill on the street. Pass it over." I say, no way, Jose. That's my $20. No, the parent says, the halacha says, I take care of you, I give you a roof over your head, I give you food, I get you clothing. You have to give that $20 bill to me. That's the halacha. What do you think the reaction is going to be? I hate this religion, right? But anyway, aval hasamuch al shulchan acherim chinam kegon yatom katan v'chayotze bo harei mitziato le'atzmo. So this halacha only applies to parents and children. It does not apply to, let's say, an orphan who's a dependent of someone else. Let's say a child is living in a foster parent's home. So that child does not have to surrender their lost object, a found object, to a foster parent, only to their actual biological parents. Okay? And what's the reason why the rabbis instituted this? Hoil v'zanan mishalo. Since the parent is supporting the child with his own money. It's the least the child can do to show some level of reciprocation. And listen to the language. He says, "Dekach haya nir'eh yashar lachachamim l'shalem hatov la'osa imotov." The rabbi saw this as the proper thing to show some level of appreciation to someone who does so much good to you. Shemezinoto afal pi she'enu chayv lefarnasan, because after all, a parent is not obligated to support a child past a certain age. I think the age is 6 or 7, that a parent has an obligation to support a child. But past
Rabbi,
that
can I just
age,
ask you something on that?
sure.
The past 6 or 7. So what's the rationale behind that? That there's no obligation. Who would be obligated?
No
Is
one.
the child responsible for themselves after 6 or 7?
Yeah, go and take care of yourself. Now, because of Dina de Malchuta, because of the law of the land, I cannot relinquish that responsibility. But nonetheless, the parent can say, well, halachically, I don't have to support you, so at least you have to reciprocate the kindness that I am showing you, by taking care of you, to relinquish at least the objects that you find.
Sorry to follow up on it, but let's say we were living in a country where, it was acceptable not to take, not to take responsibility or have the obligation. Like, it just seems to me cruel. I can't imagine, maybe things were different back then, but, to turn to your 6 or 7-year-old, because as we know, there are countries where there's child labor and other things. So is the Torah or is halacha sanctioning, that type of thing, that a 6, 7-year-old is fully capable of working and supporting themselves and etc.?
Yeah. The halacha does sanction that, as long as you're capable of supporting yourself. The Torah is not telling a parent to cruelly throw their child out of the house.
Right.
But the Torah is saying that a child should realize that they are the beneficiary of a kindness that a parent is showing, that a parent could easily shirk if they wanted to by rights, and therefore the child should show some level of appreciation. In
Right.
other words, I always used to think that it was wrong for a parent to guilt a child in any way. I brought you into this world, you didn't ask to come into this world, and so the least I can do is take care of you until you're capable of taking care of yourself. But that's not the halachic approach. It's I only did this with my last 2 children, and I've been a parent for a very long time, for most of my life. And my older children, I never wanted to let them know how hard it was for me to work and support them. But
Right.
but my last couple of kids, I make a point of telling them, do you know how much tuition costs just to put you through school? It's a huge burden for us. And the reason why is I think it's actually, we're doing a service for our kids when we let them know how much we're sacrificing for them. Because we're modeling for them what we expect them to do for others. When you become a parent, you're going to make those same sacrifices for your kids. And you're going to do it not because it's hard. You're going to do it with absolute love. You're going to want to do it. But I want you to know that your mother and I gave up many, many vacations and many opportunities to put away money for the future so that you would be able to have a good life and that you would be able to have a nice wardrobe, and so forth and so on. And I think that's actually a good thing. I never used to think this until probably maybe the last 10 years, but I've come to the realization that we do our children a service when we explain to them all the things that we've done for them, even though it may go against our baser natures to trying to want to be altruistic without taking credit for it. Anyone want to counterpoint that?
So I just want to follow up, if you don't mind. No, I agree. Your last point, I think, is a little bit separate from at least what I'm trying to get at. I'll give you a modern day example, which I deal with patients on a regular basis, where a couple gets divorced and the father let's say we were living in a halachic state, right? So the father would be fully in his rights to say, let's say he has children, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, to turn to the mother and say, I have no halachic obligation to help you. And, the children basically are at an age where they can look after themselves. So therefore I have no halachic obligation to do so. And I'm skipping town and I'm going off with wife number 2, etc. Like I see this all the time, even in Canada, where they're mandated, where especially fathers will shirk their responsibility and tell the mother, like the typical scenarios where a father is quite wealthy and the mother is a housewife and she basically, anyways, but the bottom line is, it seems to me just a little bit, I would hate to use this word, but cruel to tell, I can understand your point is different to definitely I think it's very important to let children know that, what's involved with child rearing. It's a great educational exercise, but I have a problem with this. You understand where I'm coming from?
When you're dealing with children, with parents who abandon their children.
No, I'm saying like you've got like something that shocked me because I wasn't brought up that way, but I over the years have met especially husbands where they get divorced, and the moment that they are not by law required to help out their children, they're out of the picture. Like they don't give a cent, as opposed to a woman, generally speaking, I'm generalizing, a woman generally will always have a soft spot or care for her children. But men, we tend to be a little bit more cold, especially in the divorce situation. So my
I
point
haven't.
is,
I have not encountered that generalization. I can tell you, and having worked with many couples over the years, that I've seen both. I've seen both men who skip town and show a certain callousness. I've also seen husbands who take even more care than their ex-wives to make sure that the children are provided for and are willing to completely deplete themselves financially. And I've also seen women who exploit the system in order to take their husbands for everything that they've got. I've also seen women who create enmity between her ex-husband, the father, and the children because she has primary custody. I've also seen I've seen fathers who have been deadbeat dads. I've seen all kinds, and so I respectfully disagree with your assessment that
no,
men
but I agree.
generally.
Actually, I agree. I've seen all those things as well. But my bigger point was that halachically, a couple, let's say a very happily married couple in a very healthy, situation, forget about the divorce, could turn to their 8-year-old child and say, you know what, let's say we were living in a society where the child didn't have to go to school by law, turn to their child and say, you know what, you're 8 years old. It's time for you to go get a job in the sweatshop and pay us rent and pay for your daily necessity based on what you're telling me.
Well,
Halachically.
Alan, there were times in history, in world history, where an 8-year-old child had to work on the farm in order so the parents could stay financially afloat. It wasn't
But
just.
that's very, no, that I agree with you, but that's an example of a child helping out, and life was different, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is, correct me if I'm wrong. Today, let's say we were living in a society where it was within the law to allow such a situation. A couple could turn to their child and say, listen, buddy, you're on your own. You gotta.
No, but that's
Right.
but that's the point I'm making. It's today is totally different from back then. What I'm saying is back when this halacha was made, it was commonplace for children to go to work at 8 years old, to work on the farm or to work for somebody else and to apprentice by someone, because that's how the economy was run.
Which I understand, but what I'm saying is it not that you're making the point, if I'm not mistaken, that this is still valid today?
It's still
That the
valid from the sense, it's still valid from the point of view that a child the rabbis gave a parent, they awarded a parent certain privileges, financial privileges for their child, um, out of a reciprocation to the parent for magnanimously supporting their children beyond the age in which they're required halachically to do so. It
So you're
doesn't
saying on a
mean
practical level, they're not this would not be implemented today, even in a society where it was permissible. It's more got to do with if they find, $1,000, bag of cash, obviously then it goes to the parent
goes
because
to the parent because that's
yeah,
the halacha. Because the parent can say, "Look, yes, it's true. Dina de Malchusa says I have to keep you in my home and I have to feed you until you're 18 years old, right?" But by the same token, the halacha recognizes that what I'm doing for you is a kindness, and in reciprocation for that kindness, you have to surrender anything that you find on the street from Hefker. If you find something, you have to surrender it. Now, does a parent have a right to be moichel that? Of course they do. They can say, "Oh, I'm so happy for you. You found the $20 bill. You can keep it." Right?
right,
But this is the right of a parent to say, if you found a bag of $1,000, you got to give it to us. Um,
right,
Anyway, but I would say that if they found a bag of $1,000, the ethical thing to do would be to try to find the real owner, in all situations. But we've talked about that before. Um, anyway, so that's the basic halacha, that it has to do with creating reciprocation, that children should give back to their parents as a sign of appreciation to what their parents have done for them. Ulam, misha pasak livno mizonos al shulchano. But if a father creates a business deal with his child, such that the child has to pay a certain amount for let's say rent, or for eating the meals with the parents, basem itziyaso la'atzmo dehader chiyuv noseno. Because then, now that it's a business arrangement, the child now is entitled to keep his own lost objects. Umashma di'in lo pasak lo velo nischayev lo, as gami v'abein nasui mitziyaso lav. And it seems like this could be true even if a son is already married. Let's say the kids get married, and it's hard for them to find their own apartment. They don't have enough money to pay rent, and the parents say, "Okay, you can live in our basement." So this halacha extends even to married children. As long as the children are dependents on their parents, they still have to surrender any objects that they find that they acquire from Hefker. They legally have an obligation, or financial legal obligation, to surrender those to their parents. Okay, all right. So that's the halacha, the standard halacha of when a dependent finds a lost object, and this is a takanas chachamim, and it's the same darchei shalom. It's preserving peace. Because if we would allow a dependent to keep anything that they find, and they're still consuming all of the goods of the provider, and there's no reciprocation, that's going to create resentment. But then it says, "Aval im ein beno samoch al shulchano, afal pishu katan mitziyaso la'atzmo." But if a child is not a dependent on his parents' table, even if the child is still a minor, he's allowed to keep whatever he finds. And we'll continue, Mirz Hashem, this halacha tomorrow. Okay? Did everyone get the new PDF? Everyone has it from the WhatsApp? Okay, good. All right, so we'll hold it here for today. Interesting conversation.